West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
It is not often the case these days, but today, the Supreme Court issued a long-anticipated, monumental ruling that actually bolsters America's democratic strength. Now, the case before the court today contained at its core an idea that was central to the Donald Trump scheme to overturn the 2020 elections. The question of whether state legislatures can do whatever they want in elections, up to and including simply appointing electors to their preferred candidate, even when the citizens of their state vote the other way. Trump's lawyers pushed the idea that Republican legislators in all kinds of states could simply ignore the will of the people in states that voted for Joe Biden and opt instead to send their own fake electors, Trump electors, to Congress. It was fake electors in 7 swing states, Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, New Mexico, and Nevada, that in coordination with the Trump campaign sought to overthrow the election results. Trump and his lawyer John Eastman, along with others, actively lobbied for and pushed this idea across multiple states, trying, in fact, to get state legislatures to abandon their core democratic duty and choose instead a path to essentially crown Trump king. Here's the former Speaker of the Arizona House, Republican conservative Rusty Bowers, describing a 2020 call he got from Trump coup lawyer John Eastman.
And what did Dr. Eastman want you to do?
That we would, in fact, take a vote to overthrow, or I shouldn't say overthrow, that we would decertify the electors, and that because we had plenary authority to do so. And I said, what would you have me do? And he said, just do it and let the court sort it out.
Plenary authority, absolute, total authority. The state legislators have total authority over who wins an election. We now have new reporting from the Washington Post that special counsel Jack Smith has taken a keen interest in the fake electors plot, focusing specifically on potential fraud. New York Times recently reported that one of the Trump campaign's key players in the scheme may actually be cooperating with federal prosecutors. And tomorrow, Republican Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, who Trump infamously called and told to find roughly 11,000 votes to overturn the Georgia results, will meet with federal prosecutors for, as far as we know, the first time on the special counsel's team in Atlanta. We're going to have more on the special counsel's investigation and the rapid developments coming up. But again, at the core of Trump's attempted coup, and there's a bunch of things going on, but at its core, as articulated by John Eastman, as he told Rusty Bowers, is this bizarre, to my mind, facially ludicrous fringe idea that conservatives ran with after their scheme failed to return Trump to the White House. It's called the independent state legislature theory, although calling it a theory gives it a little too much credit. And it would give state legislatures plenarily, virtually unchecked power over federal elections. It was an idea infamously pushed by coup memo author John Eastman and his allies in Congress. Basically says state legislatures are the ultimate arbiters of how elections are run in a state, no matter what state law or state officials or, crucially, state courts say.
All we are demanding of Vice President Pence is this afternoon at 1 o'clock, he let the legislatures of the state look into this so we get to the bottom of it and the American people know whether we have control of the direction of our government or not. This is bigger than President Trump. It is the very essence of our Republican form of government, and it has to be done. And anybody that is not willing to stand up to do it does not deserve to be in the office. It is that simple.
That was the speech at the Ellipse right before an angry mob went to the Capitol and bashed a bunch of cops' brains in. The insurrection on January 6th failed in its goal to subvert democracy. It failed to keep Donald Trump in office for a second term. But in many ways, the spirit of the coup, of Donald Trump's multi-pronged plan to overturn the election results, continued and continues. I mean, we've seen in state after state, like Arizona, Georgia, and Texas, Republicans stripping power from state elections officials, and candidates vowing to abolish bipartisan election commissions in states like Wisconsin. So this time, it wasn't a violent mob, but politicians, locally elected officials at the state level, trying to carry out a version of Eastman's vision, right? To take power back from any official that has it delegated and give it all to the state legislatures so that they can run elections entirely. Not coincidentally, those are also the places where Republicans have a lot of control. And they've been doing it right in front of all of us. I mean, we were covering it back in May of 2021. In Arizona, Republican state legislators stripped Secretary of State Katie Hobbs, a Democrat, of her ability to defend election lawsuits. And it gave the power to who? Well, exclusively to the Attorney General, a Republican. We are watching essentially a slow motion insurrection being carried out by Republicans in suits and ties in states all across the country. They are putting the pieces in place to do in the next elections what the mob failed to do on January 6th. And that slow motion insurrection, this idea from the right wing that the power of self-governance does not sit in the hands of the people, the idea that the power and oversight of elections belongs to basically Republican self-gerrymandered majorities in the state level, that idea, that core idea, is the subject of today's monumental Supreme Court ruling. The case is out of the state of North Carolina. It's called Moore v. Harper. And in it, North Carolina Republicans argued that this independent state legislature theory gave them virtually unchecked power over elections.
The lawmakers' argument hinges on a political concept called the independent state legislature theory, based on the Constitution's election clause saying the time, place, and manner of holding elections for senators and representatives shall be prescribed in each state by the legislature thereof. So if the court lands on the side of North Carolina House Speaker Tim Moore and his Republican colleagues, Fredrickson explains it could mean state legislatures can act independently and governors and state courts would have no ability to check laws related to federal election.
Well, today in a 6-3 ruling, the Supreme Court rejected that extreme and dangerous legal theory, not to say one completely unfounded in the text of the Constitution. The case centers around an extremely aggressive partisan North Carolina congressional map drawn by Republicans in the state legislature, very gerrymandered, using 2020 census data. And it's a map that would give Republicans up to 10 seats in the House. In early 2022, the North Carolina Supreme Court threw out that gerrymandered map and rejected Republicans' arguments that state courts had no role to play in drawing congressional maps. And then conservatives tried to go over the state court's head, challenged the ruling on the cart, and went to the Supreme Court to argue that the Constitution gives them and only them, us in the state legislature, the only and total power over how we draw congressional maps. State courts don't matter. Well, today, the conservative Supreme Court that Donald Trump is responsible for shaping plainly rejected this radical and, dare I say it, kooky notion. Chief Justice John Roberts authored the 6-3 opinion with both Trump-appointed Justices Brett Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett siding with the liberals. Justices Clarence Thomas, Samuel Alito, and Neil Gorsuch dissented. In his opinion for the majority, Chief Justice wrote that, quote, legislatures, the framers recognized, are the mere creatures of the state constitutions and cannot be greater than their creators. Meaning, the state government as a whole functions to oversee elections. If there's a state constitution that's interpreted by state courts, they get a say. State legislatures aren't some like special magical power that overrules everything in the state. That's ludicrous. This is the second pro-democracy ruling from this very right-wing court this term alone. Remember, a few weeks ago, they also upheld, crucially, Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act and struck down a flagrantly biased Alabama congressional map. And I can't read the minds of the justices, particularly Roberts and Kavanaugh, who are the majority in both opinions, but I have to think the sustained focus amongst the press and civil society and politicians on the very real, indeed existential threats to the American experiment as posed by John Eastman, Donald Trump, and his movement. The focus on that has shaped the court's thinking, and thank goodness for that.
It is Wednesday, the 28th of June of 2023, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunnar the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef. Precious, the little Yorkie, is our door girl, and she will be seating you directly for our especially special daily special, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. Will no one rid us of these meddlesome priests? And they're everywhere. Moms of Liberty, we're looking at you too. You think that you're going to be exempted from some sort of religious cultic disdain? Well, you will. Yeah, hey, I just saw a report. I was thinking about having it in the salon today, but we went into a slightly different route. But nonetheless, it looks like Florida and Texas have a malaria outbreak. Well, that's what happens when you don't get rid of the bloodsuckers. Right. Get rid of all that regulation. Buildings fall down. You know, there's like an anniversary of a building that collapsed and no one talks about it anymore except the people who either survived it or have family members who are still buried under it. Are they? Do they like just cart them off with all the rest of the debris? All right. Great state to live in. Malaria. A malaria outbreak in Florida and Texas. Hey, Elon Musk, you're like moving your operation to Texas, aren't you? Spends a lot of his time in Vegas training, apparently, for a cage match that won't be happening. But he wants people to think that he does. Yeah, I'm going to do it. Yeah, there's some report that he actually paid a guy, what, $10 million, $2 million, whatever, to come over and like wrestle around on a live stream. And apparently the guy did. Oh, yeah, Ellen's like ready. He's ready for a cage match. Yeah, right. All right. I can't even, go to the mat, but I could take Ellen. I could. So could you. Guy's a pasty guy. Have you seen that guy without a shirt? That's the only thing that's going to keep me away from a cage match where I might be competing, is because I'd have to wear sunglasses or goggles or something. It's too bright in here. I can't see my opponent. Everything's like washed out in white. I can't see. I have to put a stripe across him somehow just to be able to tell him from the background. I don't know why we went there, but we did. Who cares about Musk? Well, apparently enough people who might be fighting a war with Russia right now. Yes, Starlink. I sure hope that our people are keeping an eye on this guy, because their track record on following the actual target has been a little bit skewed, let us say. Oh yeah, we got Antifa. We got to go find all these eco-terrorists, people who want to save the honeybees. They're eco-terrorists. Got to go after them, infiltrate their groups, find out why they're doing this to destroy America. And, when they get actual evidence of white supremacists, Nazis, uprising to try to violently take over America, oh, no, that's not true. Antifa, we got to go after Antifa. So I'm just hoping, that they're not going after the Sierra Club. Though I have my issues with the Sierra Club on a couple of different nativist reasons, and we'll get into that someday. But nonetheless, they're going after the Sierra Club. They're not going after the Nazis. All right. Moms for Liberty. God, I hate that group. Nazi Frau. The Netroots Radio Style Manual actually stipulates that Moms for Liberty should be referred to as much as possible as Nazi Frau. See, this is what happens when the royal we are able to impart or input entries into the Netroots Radio Style Manual. Yes, from on high. Okay, well, what do we have in store for you on this fabulous Smothered Benedict Wednesdays? And I should assure people, there's a lot of implied, mayhem and whatnot. Really, all we're talking about here is a lovely velvety hollandaise sauce and a great egg dish. Okay, come on. Cooked perfectly, because this is the virtual world. You can have it as perfect as you say it is. Or are we going to have AI say it is? All right. Hey, AI, is it okay? I'm not giving up my autonomy to that. Are you? Let's hope not. We might have to anyway. Who knows? All right. What do we have in store for you here in this salon that we call West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy? Pennsylvania caseworkers who ignored years of child abuse now face felony charges. Mm-hmm. I suppose I should mention that the Supreme Court ruled against the right slow motion insurrection, as Chris Hayes described it, and I guess you already knew that. So there. Back to the Bistro Cafe here. Oh, a federal watchdog reports more than $200 billion may have been stolen from 2 large COVID-19 relief initiatives. Mm-hmm. Now let's remember where all that came from. Trumpland. And New Mexico reached a settlement with the Department of Energy over a permit renewal for the federal government's only underground repository for nuclear waste. I don't know where we put this stuff. Maybe we shouldn't be using it. Where we make more of it and then we have to throw it away somewhere. Hide it. Make it go away. Hide it. After the break, we move to the chef's table where former Audi boss Rupert Stadler was convicted of fraud in connection with the automaker's diesel emission scandal. That's the one where their software faked out any technician looking for emissions. Yeah, Volkswagen, Audi, they are connected, And Germany documented 2,480 incidents of anti-Semitism in the country last year, just under 7 incidents per day on average. It is a global movement, and we have to punch them, and then we have to punch them again. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page, right there by the social media scroll, is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. So go ahead, chat. Thank you, Kelly, for everything that you do. And as a reminder, Kelly will be attending under the banner of Netroots Radio, Netroots Nation in Chicago. So we look forward to that. And thank you, Kelly, once again. If you out there in radio listening land would then take a gander across the left from that chat room link on our homepage, near the bottom, across to the left at netrootsradio.com, you'll notice the link to our Patreon page. And hey, if you could afford to send us what you might spend on an espresso type coffee drink once a month, that really does help us put a big dent in paying our bills and the other costs incurred in running this powerhouse of resistance. So thank you to those of you who have been so generous. And also thank you to those of you who have increased your patronage monthly. That has been very helpful. And also thank you to those of you who have newly become Patreons of Netroots Radio. Because it's not just this show. You support our ability to bring you, well, the rest of the Netroots Radio content, plus our national feeds. Because they're our friends and we're all in this together. And what is that? Well, I think we're going to try to be a bulwark against the, what shall we call it, the Nazi fascist takeover of the world. Yeah, we can't let it happen. And it seems like they've got a pretty good foothold. All right, enough of that. But thank you. Thank you once again for your generosity in allowing us to fulfill our civic duty as the founders originally intended so many, 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 many years ago. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, Mastodon, and Spoutable, you can do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that and a lot more. Thank you, Tom. Follow me on Twitter, Mastodon, and Spoutable. I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Co's 10 minutes before showtime. But you can always find those show notes and links diaries by going to my social media feed because the links are just right there. Follow the show on Twitter because I don't have it on Mastodon and Spoutable, but I'll get it there. Nonetheless, you can follow it on Twitter at Cookbook West. And most importantly, please do pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker. And apparently Stitcher is being thrown into the trash heap of technological advancement because Sirius, which apparently acquired Stitcher, has decided to get rid of it. But you can always find us on Spreaker, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, Apple Podcasts, iTunes. I think they're different now. But nonetheless, you can find us wherever you can find podcasts because we're there among all of them. Alrighty. Yeah, Stitcher, they were one of the first that approached us way back, and we went live. The whole station is live on Stitcher, but we're live on TuneIn as well if you don't get us on our homepage. But listen to us on our homepage. That's pretty easy too. Alrighty, this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is by Michael Rubencam out of the Associated Press. I have to slow down here. A child welfare agency in Pennsylvania failed to protect children from horrific abuse and neglect, allowing them to languish for years in homes overtaken by animal waste and garbage, a prosecutor said yesterday, Tuesday, as he announced criminal charges against 5 caseworkers. 3 caseworkers and 2 supervisors at the Lackawanna County's Office of Youth and Family Services in Scranton were arrested on felony charges of child endangerment and failing to report abuse days after state authorities downgraded the county agency's license. The caseworkers knew that children were living in dangerous, deplorable conditions, but instead of coming to the rescue, they chose to walk away, said District Attorney Mark Powell. In some cases, he said, the workers falsified reports to make it seem like everything was okay when they knew it wasn't. A Lackawanna County spokesperson declined to comment on the allegations, which involve 8 children and 3 households, or whether any reforms were planned at the Child Welfare Agency. In one case, police went to a house for a report of loose dogs and found what court documents described as a house of horrors. Broken windows, piles of junk, swarms of mites or fleas, walls and floors covered in animal feces and urine, and an overwhelming smell of feces, rotten garbage, fly activity and decay that required an officer to use a respirator. The children in the home, ages 9 and 10, were underfed, covered in flea bites, and slept on the floor without a pillow or blankets. The younger child was not toilet trained, according to court documents, 9 years old. The mother said she knew she was failing to provide a safe home for her children and told police she repeatedly and fruitlessly begged the Office of Youth and Family Services for help, according to a police affidavit. She was desperately seeking help, tools, treatment, and services which never came, the police report said. Last week, following an annual inspection, the Pennsylvania Department of Human Services downgraded the county's license to provisional status and ordered it to submit a plan of correction. In response to the state inspection, the Office of Youth and Family Services tried to shift blame to Scranton Police, whom the agency accused of running a questionably motivated criminal investigation into its practices. Bad actors in the police department are routinely using threats and intimidation to investigate the Child Welfare Agency, county officials said in their formal response. The investigation's primary outcome appears to be the denigration and defamation of both individuals in the agency as well as the entire mission, vision, and practice of the agency. A message was left with Scranton Police Chief Thomas Carroll seeking a response to the agency's claims. The county agency also blamed staff shortages for some of the problems, saying it was trying to increase its ranks and take other steps to address the shortcomings identified in the state inspection. Powell, the DA, said a lack of staff had nothing to do with the criminal behavior of some of the agency's employees. The children in these cases didn't fall through the cracks because the agency was understaffed. These cases were on the agency's radar for a long time, said Powell, adding that referrals had come from neighbors, landlords, teachers, code inspectors, medical professionals, and others. He said the abuse and neglect that these children suffered because of the agency's indifference was heartbreaking and unacceptable. Richard Lardner and Jennifer McDermott of the Associated Press bring us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. More than $200 billion may have been stolen from 2 large COVID-19 relief initiatives, according to new estimates from a federal watchdog investigating federally funded programs that helped small businesses survive the worst public health crisis in more than 100 years. The numbers issued yesterday on Tuesday by the U.S. Small Business Administration Inspector General are much greater than the office's previous projections and underscore how vulnerable the Paycheck Protection and COVID-19 Economic Injury Disaster Loan programs were to fraudsters, particularly during the early stages of the coronavirus pandemic. The Inspector General's report said at least 17% of all COVID, EIDL, and PPP funds were dispersed to potentially fraudulent actors. The fraud estimate, for the COVID-19 Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program is more than $136 billion, which represents 33% of the total money spent on that program, according to the report. The Paycheck Protection fraud estimate is $64 billion, the Inspector General said. In comments attached to the report, a senior Small Business Administration official disputed the new numbers. Belvie DeVries, SBA's acting associate administrator for capital access, said the Inspector General's approach contains serious flaws that significantly overestimate fraud and unintentionally mislead the public to believe that the work we did together had no significant impact in protecting against fraud. The SBA Inspector General had previously estimated fraud in the COVID-19 disaster loan program at $86 billion and the Paycheck Protection Program at $20 billion. Now, the Associated Press reported on June 13th that scammers and swindlers potentially swiped about $280 billion in COVID-19 emergency aid. An additional $123 billion was wasted or misspent. The bulk of the potential losses are from the two Small Business Administration programs and another to provide unemployment benefits to workers suddenly unemployed by the economic upheaval by the pandemic. The three initiatives were begun during the Trump administration and inherited by President Joe Biden. Combined, the loss estimated by the Associated Press represents 10% of the $4.2 trillion the U.S. government has so far dispersed in COVID relief aid. The federal government has now reported $276 billion in potential fraud, a figure that aligns with the AP's analysis. Toya Bryan of the Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. New Mexico has reached a settlement with the U.S. Department of Energy over the renewal of a permit for the federal government's only underground repository for nuclear waste. Officials with the New Mexico Environmental Department announced yesterday, Tuesday, that an agreement was reached last week after 4 days of negotiations. The state first outlined its terms in December, seeking to ensure that high-level waste such as diluted plutonium wouldn't find its way to the state. So they agreed to this last week, and we're only hearing about it now. Okay, Well, at least we're hearing about it. The waste isolation pilot plant in southeastern New Mexico plays a key role in the nation's multi-billion-dollar effort to clean up radioactive waste left behind by decades of nuclear research and bomb making, and then move it somewhere else and try to forget about it. Currently, it is licensed to take what is known as transuranic waste, or waste generated by the nation's nuclear weapons program, that is contaminated with radioactive elements heavier than uranium. The new draft permit would provide greater regulatory oversight, well, thank God, and safeguards at the repository over the next decade. Well, why not now? It would also prioritize the cleanup of Cold War-era waste at Los Alamos, the birthplace of the atomic bomb. The state agency expected to publish the modified permit on August 15th. A public meeting will follow in September where you can rant all you want, but nothing's going to happen, so too bad. With the final permit being issued in October. See? Nuclear watchdog groups said they were in support of the agreement because it focuses on the waste at Los Alamos and requires more transparency about legacy defense-related waste around the U.S. The permit also includes language that would enable a state to suspend shipments to WIP if there's evidence of a threat to human health or the environment. Well, that's good. New Mexico also could move to revoke the permit if Congress were to increase WIP's capacity or expand the types of waste that could be sent there. State officials and watchdogs have said that language serves as a hedge against New Mexico becoming the nation's permanent dumping ground, which means New Mexico is going to be the nation's permanent dumping ground. Under the permit, the Energy Department would have to document its progress in siting another underground repository in a state other than New Mexico through a new annual report, as well as hold quarterly meetings to update the public. Yeah, we'll see. Well, that brings us to our break, and why don't we take it? And when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Clinton Johnston. This week, back in a flash. It's time for The Flash, another DCU movie, which means two things. One, the male filmmakers will shorten Wonder Woman's battle skirt another few inches. Seriously, at this point it's more a low-hanging belt than a skirt. And two, the DCU will find another way to make their heroes the main villains because, once again, the people behind the Detective Comics cinematic universe hate their heroes. I know you saw General Zod in the trailer. Trust me, he's just side dressing. The real threat to the multiverse, and I still hate multiverse stories, is the Flash himself. But let's give the Flash the benefit of the doubt. As I intimated in my Spider-Man Across the Multiverse review, maybe what we're seeing now is not just a self-serving canny bid to exploit nostalgia to leverage long-term intellectual property owned by corporations who have successfully lobbied Congress to extend the length of copyright laws in order to maintain their exclusive control over still profitable intellectual content. Maybe what we're seeing is a new postmodern hip-hop inspired, or at least analogous, narrative form that rejects the belief in the new idea or original storyline, except for the rare freak occurrence, and fully embraces the idea that all plots are just a reapplication of formulas and tropes. Thus, they are honored by the sample and made relevant by the remix. Through that lens, The Flash is really well done. Finding that he can go back in time, Barry Allen does so to make his mom not be dead, but he can't beat the butterfly effect and either creates or shifts into a world without a Superman, which is modern-day Tim Burton's 1989 Batman. So yay, Michael Keaton Bruce Wayne is back to teach Ezra Miller's Barry what he refused to accept from Ben Affleck Bruce, that we must honor the traumas that have molded us rather than enshrine them, thus letting them define us, which is not a new storyline, but still a worthwhile one. This has been Take Take-Two Movie Review. I'm Clinton Johnston. Catch up with us at take2moviereview.com and feed us back in our channel on YouTube.
This is Scientific American's Science Quickly. I'm Christopher Intagliata. It's easy to get lost in the salt pans of Tunisia. There are these featureless plains in the desert where the ground is sometimes the blinding white color of salt.
So it's a very strange feeling, and some people really feel uncomfortable there because you basically don't see anything.
Markus Knadin is at the Max Planck Institute for Chemical Ecology in Jena, Germany. And he does field work in the salt pans with his colleague Marilia Freira.
So actually the car that we drove was often the landmark, so we could know how to return back to it because it's very easy to get lost.
While it's easy to get lost for them, that's not really the case for their study subjects, a type of desert ant that can walk for more than half a mile over these flat plains and still find its way home. And to be fair, the ants have a few tricks to be able to do that.
What we know from them is they use a sun compass to get an idea in which direction they walk, and they count their steps to get an idea of the distances they cover in the individual directions. And by that, they always compute their relative position to the nest.
But the scientists noticed the ants had another trick too. The farther their burrows were into that flat, featureless plain, away from plants and rocks and other landmarks, the more the ants tended to build these big mounds at the entrances of their nests. They're like volcano-looking humps in the salt pan, sometimes more than 10 inches tall. And to get some sense of scale there, for these tiny ants, that's the equivalent of a human standing in front of a mountain the size of London's Big Ben. It's pretty big. And the researchers wanted to see if the ants really used these things for navigation, or if they were used for something else. So they destroyed a number of the mounds and put tall cylinders at some of the nest entrances instead. And at others, they put no landmark at all.
And what we realized was that ants with no artificial landmarks displayed a bigger effort into rebuilding their nest mound surrounding their nest entrance than those that had the artificial visual landmarks.
In other words, the ants presumably needed some sort of landmark at the colony to ensure everyone would find it. And if it wasn't there, they'd build it. The details are in the journal Current Biology. The scientists say the ants must be working together to do this, because the ones going out to forage need to collectively agree with the ones who stay put in the nest that the colony needs these landmarks, so the explorers need to convince the homebodies to build one. Knadin says it's remarkable the ants can do all that with such tiny brains.
That always fascinates me, and that makes me always thinking, why aren't we much, much better with our big brain? But I'm so bad in navigation compared to those ants. I'm a bit jealous.
Then again, we don't really have to do what the ants do, because our big brains invented GPS. Science Quickly is produced by Jeff Delvicio, Tulika Bose, and Kelso Harper. Music by Dominic Smith. Don't forget to subscribe to Science Quickly wherever you get your podcasts. Head over to scientificamerican.com for in-depth science news. For Science Quickly, I'm Christopher Intagliata.
This program is presented by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
Pools, water parks, and other recreational water venues are popular places to relax and stay cool, but they can be sources of serious illness. Since 2000, nearly 500 outbreaks have been reported at recreational water venues in the U.S., resulting in over 27,000 illnesses and 8 deaths. Most were caused by parasites, bacteria, viruses, or certain chemicals in the water. Parents with young children who have diarrhea should not allow their children to swim or play in the water. In addition, bathers should check the inspection scores of pools and water parks and can conduct mini inspections using test strips before getting in the water. A few simple precautions can allow you to share the fun, not the germs. Thank you for joining us on A Minute of Health with CDC.
For the most accurate health information, visit cdc.gov or call 1-800-CDC-INFO.
What grows in the forest? Trees? Sure. Know what else grows in the forest? Our imagination, our sense of wonder, and our family bonds grow too. Because when we disconnect from this and connect with this, we reconnect with each other. and build family memories we will carry with us forever. The forest is closer than you think. Find a forest near you and start exploring at discovertheforest.org. It's easy. Just put in your zip code to find family-friendly outdoor destinations near you. You'll also find guides to free activities, games, and amazing forest facts. Give the magic of the outdoors to your kids and reconnect with your family. Find a forest near you at discovertheforest.org. That's discovertheforest.org. Brought to you by the United States Forest Service and the Ad Council.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
The Senate has confirmed the first Muslim female federal judge in U.S. history.
Listen up. This matters. I'm Louis Black, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute with ACLU attorney Bill Newman.
The first Muslim female federal judge and the first Bangladeshi-American judge is Nusrat Chaudhry. Since 2020, Ms. Chaudhry has served as the legal director of the ACLU of Illinois. From 2008 until 2020, she served at the National ACLU office, 7 years as the deputy director of the ACLU's Racial Justice Program. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer described Chaudhry as a shining example of the American dream. She is the daughter of immigrant parents, a graduate of Columbia and Princeton, and Yale Law School. After law school, she clerked for a U.S. District Court judge and then at the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. She's also served on the Presidential Task Force on Building Trust in the American justice system. Chaudhry has led litigation to protect immigrants from dangerous detention conditions. Her team advances gender equity and the rights of children in foster care and young people in juvenile detention, as well as First Amendment rights and governmental transparency. She is expert in voting rights. The confirmation vote? It was basically along party lines. 49 opposed, 50 in favor. Judge Chaudhry will sit in the Federal District Court in Brooklyn. Congratulations, Judge.
The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the American Civil Liberties Union because freedom can't defend itself.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1936. That was the day that the U.S. Congress passed the Walsh-Healy Public Contracts Act. The bill had been proposed by the Secretary of Labor, Francis Perkins. The act was part of President Franklin Delano Roosevelt's New Deal effort to combat the ravages of the Great Depression. The year before, the President and Secretary Perkins had faced a major setback in their New Deal policies. The Supreme Court had declared the National Industrial Recovery Act, part of the Recovery Plan, unconstitutional. The President and his team went back to the drawing board to develop new strategies. Secretary Perkins told the president, quote, "I've got 2 bills locked in the lower left-hand drawer of my desk against an emergency." One of those bills became Walsh-Healy. The act declared that any manufacturer with a contract of more than $10,000 with the U.S. government for goods or supplies had to abide by certain rules. They had to pay the prevailing minimum wage. They had to allow their employees to work an 8-hour workday and a 40-hour work week. They could not hire boys under the age of 16 or girls under the age of 18. Companies could not use prison labor, and the companies had to provide a safe and healthy workplace. This New Deal Act stood up under the scrutiny of the courts. Even more importantly, the act was a precursor to the Fair Labor Standards Act. The Fair Labor Standards Act was passed the next year, providing many of these same provisions to the general workforce. The Walsh-Healy Act remains in effect today, protecting workers who are employed by companies that manufacture goods for the U.S. government. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon, on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 61 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting highs in the low to mid-90s. We're heating up. Abundant sunshine throughout the day, and winds will be out of the northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Clear skies overnight, lows in the upper 50s, winds out of the west-northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour, and then mainly sunny and hot tomorrow with highs in the mid-90s or warmer. Winds out of the northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Grass pollen is rated high in our little town of Rogue River. The air quality index for the region is in the good range at 20 parts per million, and that daytime UV index remains very high at level 9, so do take care if you have those numbers. Barometric is just now falling at 29.99 inches. Visibility is up to 10 miles, and relative humidity is at 82%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. London is 73 degrees and cloudy. Paris is 81 and sunny with a heat advisory. Rome is 85 degrees, partly cloudy, also with a heat advisory. Kyiv is 72 and partly cloudy. Kabul is 76 and fair. Hong Kong is 82 degrees and fair. Tokyo is 78 degrees with rain showers. Sydney, Australia is 50 degrees and mostly cloudy. San Francisco, California is 52 degrees and mostly cloudy with the perennial morning fog for a small craft advisory on the bay. And New York, New York is 75 degrees Fahrenheit and fair with an air advisory because of Canadian wildfire smoke. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Jordan's of the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. Former Audi boss Rupert Stadler was convicted of fraud yesterday, Tuesday, in connection with the automaker's diesel emission scandal, making him the highest-ranking executive found guilty over cars that cheated on emissions tests with the help of illegal software. A German court handed Stadler a suspended prison sentence of 21 months and ordered him to pay a fine of the equivalent of $1.2 million U.S., some of which will go to charitable groups. The sentence resulted from an agreement between his lawyers, the judge, and prosecutors after he pleaded guilty last month. The former head of Volkswagen's luxury division admitted wrongdoing and regret for his failure to keep rigged cars off the market, even after the scandal had become public knowledge. The Munich Regional Court also sentenced the former head of engine development of Wolfgang Hatz and a former Audi engineer identified only as Giovanni P. for privacy reasons to suspended prison sentences and fines. They were accused of ensuring that diesel engines met emissions limits during testing, but not on the road to save on construction costs. Prosecutors had objected to a plea agreement with Hatz. The verdicts are likely to be appealed. The court already closed a case in April against a fourth defendant who had testified for the prosecution and ordered him to pay a fine. It is the first criminal trial to conclude in Germany in connection with the diesel emission scandal. Stadler had been charged with fraud and false certification by prosecutors who said he let cars with rigged software be sold even after the U.S. EPA uncovered the fraud at Volkswagen and Audi in September of 2015. He was detained in 2018 and held for 4 months. The 60-year-old resigned as Audi chief and a member of the Volkswagen board later that year and has since paid the company some 4.1 million euros in damages for failing in his oversight duties. His boss at the time, former VW chief executive Martin Winterkorn, has been charged by U.S. and German authorities, but Germany does not generally extradite its citizens to countries outside the European Union. The diesel scandal cost Volkswagen more than $30 billion in fines and settlements and saw 2 U.S. executives sent to prison. It pushed the entire auto industry away from reliance on diesel engines, which had been almost half the auto market in Europe, and helped accelerate the shift to electric vehicles.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière, la promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Kirsten Grieshaber of the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast, Cookbook and Speakeasy. A group tracking anti-Semitism in Germany said yesterday, Tuesday, that it documented 2,480 incidents in the country last year, just under 7 incidents per day on average. In its annual report, the Department for Research and Information on Anti-Semitism, or RIAS, said that while it registered a slight decrease in anti-Semitic incidents in 2022 compared to the year before, there were 9 incidents of extreme violence, the highest number of such cases since the nationwide record-keeping began in 2017. Those extremely violent crimes include a shooting at a former rabbi's house next to an old synagogue in the western city of Essen last November. Germany's federal prosecutor is now investigating the case along with 2 other violent anti-Semitic crimes on suspicion they may have been carried out in cooperation with Iran's Revolutionary Guard. More often, however, it is everyday situations in which Jews are confronted with anti-Semitism, said Benjamin Steinitz, the head of RIAS, told reporters in Berlin. Those incidents can take place anywhere from work to home to public transport, in the supermarket, or at a concert. Such everyday anti-Semitic incidents have diverse political backgrounds and often include trivialization of the Holocaust, in which Germany's Nazis and their henchmen murdered 6 million European Jews. Every 5th anti-Semitic incident has a conspiracy background, according to what RIAS documented. A right-wing extremist background was involved in 13% of all incidents, while 53% of the incidents could not be clearly linked to a specific political background. Jews who are exposed to anti-Semitism in Germany can reach out to us, which will not only document the incidents, but also help those concerned with further contacts to criminal police focused on combating anti-Semitism and groups helping victims of Jew hatred. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here tomorrow for Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we will meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-dee-da-dum, 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 dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-dee-da-dum, 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 dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver, dans mon jardin d'hiver.